When someone hurts you, disrespects you, betrays you, thinks they can play with your emotions and walk away unbothered, they expect silence, they expect tears, they expect absence. But what they don't expect is evolution. See, going no contact is a beginning. It creates distance. It creates mystery. But silence alone doesn't break a man's ego. What breaks him is witnessing the rise of the version of you that he never believed you had the courage to become. When you go silent, disappear, but behind the scenes, you're rebuilding yourself brick by brick. You are using that silence as a weapon, but you're loading it with power. And let me be clear, no weapon is more dangerous to a man's ego than a woman who upgrades after him. I'm not just talking about doing your hair or changing your look. I'm talking about leveling up mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and financially. I'm talking about working on your body, your boundaries, your beliefs. I'm talking about walking back into the world not as the same woman he left, but as the woman he never thought you'd become. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about showing him what he lost out of spite. This is about showing yourself what you deserve. Because if all you do is disappear and wait, you're still trapped in his orbit. You're still operating from a place of hurt. But when you disappear and decide to invest in your purpose, your healing, your glow, your goals, you shift the power dynamic. You stop being reactive and you become untouchable. And here's what happens. The moment he realizes you're no longer sitting in silence, hoping for his return, the moment he realizes you're not lurking, not watching, not wondering, his ego starts to fracture. Because men feed off the idea that you're still thinking about them, that deep down you still care. But when your actions say otherwise, when your silence is backed by strength and not suffering, it shocks him. Let him check your profile and see a woman who's radiating peace. Let him hear from mutual friends that you're too busy living to be bothered. Let him scroll and still not find a trace of his name or a piece of your pain. That's when the ego starts to crumble. Because silence without growth is just hiding. But silence with transformation is domination. And you don't need to post anything to prove it. You don't need to announce your glow up. When your energy changes, it speaks volumes. When your energy says, I no longer need what broke me, that's what truly crushes him. Because the truth is, a man doesn't regret hurting a woman until he realizes she healed without him. Until he sees that she no longer needs to prove anything. That she's moved so far ahead he couldn't catch up even if he tried. So don't just vanish, rebuild, reinvent, rise. Because going no contact might confuse him, but becoming the woman he can never reach again, that will destroy his ego forever. Most people think that silence is enough, that disappearing will teach someone a lesson. But here's the truth. Silence only becomes powerful when it's partnered with presence. Your presence. In places, spaces, and levels he never thought you'd reach. If you really want to shake a man's ego, it's not just about going no contact. It's about showing up in the world like you were never broken to begin with. A man's ego doesn't get crushed by absence alone. It gets crushed when he realizes you're not just gone, you're better. He expected you to stay down, to stay heartbroken, maybe even to wait for him. But you flipped the script. You didn't just go quiet. You went higher. You got in the gym. You focused on your business. You started reading again, laughing again, living again. Not in spite of him, but because you finally realized he was never your source of peace, power, or purpose. But that's when it hurts. Because the male ego is fragile when it loses control. And that's the part most don't understand. A man can walk away from a woman he thinks he still has access to. But when he realizes you redefined yourself, when he can't find traces of the woman he once knew, that's what destroys his pride. That's what keeps him up at night. Not your silence, but your strength. Not your absence, but your evolution. This isn't about pretending to be unbothered. It's about genuinely being unbothered. It's not about posting quotes or subliminals. It's about moving in silence and letting your life speak. Because when you show the world that the pain didn't pause you, it actually propelled you. That's when you start stepping into a version of yourself that makes men rethink everything. Imagine him watching you grow from the sidelines, watching you smile deeper, watching you shine brighter, watching you carry yourself with a confidence that says, I know who I am now, and you can't reach me anymore. That's the ultimate shift. That's the moment he realizes not only did he lose access to you, but he also lost influence. He no longer has a hold on your emotions. He no longer has a space in your thoughts. You became too whole for his games. Because here's the secret. Silence is not about hiding. It's about mastering the art of not responding while quietly becoming untouchable. It's about choosing not to react because your evolution is louder than any argument could ever be. Your glow, your confidence, your ability to move forward, that's what unsettles his ego more than any text you'll never send. So let your comeback be quiet. Let it be powerful. Let it be seen, not spoken. Because the moment he realizes he can't trigger you anymore, that's the moment his ego begins to collapse. It's one thing to ignore a man. It's another thing entirely to outgrow him. See, most people misunderstand what real power looks like after a breakup. They think it's coldness, revenge, blocking him, or even posting a new picture just to get a reaction. But the truth is, when a man sees you outgrowing everything he thought would break you, that shakes him at the core. You want to crush his ego? Don't just disappear. Evolve. There's a difference between disappearing to punish someone and disappearing to find yourself. When your silence is fueled by self-respect, healing, and purpose, it carries a different weight. Because now, you're not doing it for him, you're doing it for you. You're not playing games. You're building a whole new life, one that no longer needs his approval, attention, or presence. A man's ego feeds off of predictability. He expects you to be where he left you, emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically. He expects you to still check his page, to still hold on to his words, to still be hoping for closure or another conversation. So when you step out of that pattern, when you level up in a way that's undeniable, he doesn't know how to process it because now you've rewritten the story. Growth is the loudest revenge, and it requires no performance. You don't have to act unbothered. You become unbothered when your peace starts to matter more than his potential. When you stop seeing yourself as someone waiting to be chosen and start seeing yourself as someone who already chose herself, that's when you rise. That's when you become untouchable. He'll feel it, not because you made him feel it, but because he'll see what he lost when he watches who you've become. He'll see it when the new version of you starts speaking louder than your old patterns. He'll notice that you're not trying to make him jealous. You've simply moved so far beyond what used to hurt you that there's no room left for him. This is where real emotional power is born. Not from being bitter, but from becoming better. Not from needing to prove anything to him, but from having nothing left to prove. The ego doesn't get crushed by confrontation. It gets crushed when it realizes it no longer controls the narrative. And the moment he sees that your glow came from within, not from a rebound or a reaction, that's the moment his pride begins to fall apart. Because now he's watching a woman he can't touch, a woman he thought he could return to whenever he pleased, but that woman is gone. She's been replaced by someone wiser, more grounded, more focused, someone who doesn't beg for answers, because she became the answer. Someone who doesn't chase closure because her peace closed that chapter for her. You want to truly shake a man's ego? Heal, grow, outgrow the pain, outgrow the cycles, Outgrow who you were when you tolerated what he gave you. Let him see that he's not the reason you're rising, but that your rising made him irrelevant. Not out of malice, but out of maturity. And that, more than anything, is what his ego will never recover from. One of the most powerful things you can do to crush his ego is to become deeply unpredictable. And I don't mean playing games or creating drama. That's still you moving in reaction to him. I'm talking about unpredictability that comes from genuine transformation. When you start showing up differently, not because you want a reaction, but because you've actually changed, he won't know how to handle it. See, the reason no contact works temporarily is because it disrupts the cycle he's used to. But if he can predict what comes after your silence, he still feels in control. He thinks she'll disappear for a while, then she'll reach out again, she'll check my story, like my posts, maybe slide back in when she misses me. That's how his ego survives. It lives off the idea that even in your distance, you're still orbiting around him. But unpredictability, that's a death sentence for the ego. Because suddenly you're not doing what he expects, you're not reacting, you're not watching, and you're not returning. You're rewriting your patterns. And now he has no access point, no emotional leverage, no clue where you stand. And that loss of control eats away at him. Let me give you an example. He's expecting you to stay quiet, so he sends a random text. Hey, just checking in. Before, you'd have replied in minutes, or maybe just waited a little to seem strong, but you'd always reply. Now, you don't respond at all, not with coldness, but with peace, because your life is too full, too forward-focused to make space for confusion. That silence, it's no longer about hurting him. It's a reflection of how healed you've become. In unpredictability, it doesn't just live in your silence. It lives in your energy, in how you carry yourself. He thought you'd be broken, bitter, maybe even petty, but he sees you glowing, centered, elevating. That's not what he planned for. That's not what he prepared for. And because he can't read you anymore, he loses the one thing his ego needs: control. Remember this, when a man can't predict you, he can't play you. When you stop being the woman he used to manipulate emotionally, you become the woman he can't reach. That kind of power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from clarity, from loving yourself so deeply that you don't need to prove anything, not even your strength. Let him sit with the confusion. Let him sit with the silence, because that's where his ego will start to feel the weight of your transformation. One of the most crushing things you can do to a man's ego is to succeed without him. And I don't mean surface level success, like flaunting a new look or pretending you're over it on social media. I mean real, internal, undeniable growth that no one can fake. Elevation that radiates from the inside out. Because when a man sees that you are not just surviving the loss, but actually thriving without him, it stings in a place he didn't know existed. You see, most men with big egos assume they're the center of your world. They walk away thinking she'll crumble without me. And when you've spent so much time investing emotionally, physically, spiritually into a man, he naturally believes he has the power to define your peace. But when he looks back and sees that you are leveling up in every area of your life without his presence, without his validation, that's when his illusion of importance starts to break. Maybe you're building your business. Maybe you're pouring into your purpose. Maybe you're walking with new posture, clearer boundaries, deeper joy. That kind of glow can't be fabricated. It can't be staged. It's the result of choosing yourself fully, day by day. And it's in that choice that his ego gets crushed. Not because you're trying to hurt him, but because the version of you he remembers no longer exists. He was expecting you to be angry. He was expecting you to chase. He was expecting your world to pause in his absence. But now you've become someone who doesn't even need to explain her absence. You're no longer proving your worth. You're living it. And the beautiful irony The more you pour into your own becoming, the more he starts to feel the gap. Because what once made him feel superior, your softness, your patience, your forgiveness, is now unavailable to him. He can't access the upgraded version of you. He doesn't even know how to approach her. That's where the ego truly collapses, not in revenge, not in confrontation, but in your quiet, undeniable elevation. Let your success speak for you. Let your growth be the answer to every question he never had the courage to ask. One of the most unexpected and powerful ways to crush a man's ego is by refusing to explain yourself. Silence is a language of strength. See, most men, especially the ones who operate from ego, are used to women over-explaining, justifying, defending, or even begging to be understood. They're used to emotional outbursts, long texts, desperate apologies, or attempts to gain closure. But when you choose to remain silent, when you don't give him the satisfaction of a reaction, that silence screams louder than any words ever could. He expects chaos, he expects drama, he expects you to try to fix it. But when you step back and operate with complete emotional control, he begins to wonder if he ever had the kind of power he thought he did. Silence interrupts the script he's used to. It leaves a man spinning, trying to decode the mystery, questioning everything. Because ego feeds on your need for clarity. It thrives when you seek closure from him. But when you give yourself that closure and walk away with your dignity intact, he feels the sharp edge of being completely cut off. Not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. And no, I'm not talking about the silent treatment that's rooted in manipulation or immaturity. I'm talking about the kind of silence that says, I don't need you to understand me. I understand myself. That kind of energy is foreign to a man who built his identity around being needed. When a woman refuses to lower herself into emotional chaos, when she's no longer fighting to be heard, he starts to realize he's lost more than her voice. He's lost her presence, her essence, her peace. You see, silence is power because it requires restraint. It takes maturity to say, I don't owe anyone an explanation for the way I protect my peace. And it's in that restraint that a man's ego begins to crack, because you've removed his favorite game, control. You're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're not trying to win. You've already won by choosing your healing over his attention. So don't underestimate the power of doing nothing, of saying nothing, of simply removing yourself with grace and letting your absence echo where your words never could. Sometimes the greatest message is the one you never send. Another way to truly crush his ego is to glow up mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and yes, physically. But here's the truth. This isn't about revenge, and it's not about making him jealous. It's about shifting the energy back to you. Because when a man loses access to a woman who's constantly evolving, who's growing in silence, who's mastering herself instead of chasing someone else's attention, he doesn't just feel your absence. He starts to realize what he'll never get again. This glow up isn't superficial. It's not just about changing your hair, hitting the gym, or updating your wardrobe, though there's power in those things too. It's about leveling up in every area of your life in a way that doesn't involve proving anything to him. You begin showing up with confidence, clarity, and a calm energy that says, I'm becoming everything I needed you to be for me. And that hits a man's ego hard, especially if he thought you would crumble without him. See, a man with ego wants to feel like he broke you, that your world would collapse after he left, that you would sit there stuck, waiting for a text, checking his stories, hoping he comes back. But when you shift your energy inward and build a life so full that his presence is no longer required, he's forced to confront his own irrelevance. And that bruises the ego more than any confrontation could. He will notice when your vibe changes, when you start moving different, when you no longer explain your silence, when you stop posting for attention and start glowing for your peace. He'll feel it when your energy no longer reaches for him, when you laugh deeper, when you smile without guilt, when your eyes light up and it has nothing to do with him anymore. That's when it really sinks in, that he lost access to something rare, something healing, something divine. The most powerful glow-up is the one that comes from healing, because healed women don't chase. Healed women don't need closure. Healed women don't compete with the past. They create a future. And that kind of transformation, it's magnetic. It shifts your entire frequency. Suddenly, the same man who once took you for granted starts to question why you're so at peace without him, why you're not angry, why you're not fighting. And that's the beauty of it. You're too focused on becoming the best version of yourself to entertain anything that diminishes your worth. So let him watch. Let him see the woman you're becoming, but do it for you, not for him. Because the moment you glow up from the inside out, the ego he relied on to keep you small will crumble, and all he'll be left with is the memory of a woman he can't reach anymore. There's something incredibly powerful about becoming emotionally unbothered. Not cold, not numb, but unbothered. That shift where your peace becomes more important than your pride, where your silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. When a man expects chaos, drama, and reaction, and instead he's met with calm detachment, it does something to his ego. He's no longer in control of your emotions, and that disturbs him more than you'll ever know. You see, ego feeds on reaction. The more you cry, explain, beg, plead, the more he feels like he still has you emotionally. But when you become emotionally unbothered, when you stop letting his silence control your mood, when you don't respond to his manipulation with desperation, that's when the real shift happens. That's when he realizes, I don't have the same power over her anymore. This is not about pretending you don't care. It's about actually not letting his behavior decide how your day goes. It's about mastering your energy so well that no one gets to pull you out of alignment. When you stop letting him disturb your peace, you stop feeding the cycle he was so used to. That cycle where he could disrespect you, disappear, and return expecting the same open door. But now, you're different. Now you don't explain what you're doing, you just do it. With grace, confidence, and quiet strength. The ego thrives on the belief that he is unforgettable, that even in silence, even in distance, he's still the center of your thoughts. But when your energy no longer revolves around him, when your conversations are no longer about him, when your time is no longer spent thinking about what he's thinking, he feels it. And that absence, that emotional unavailability, it shakes him. Because suddenly, you're not asking questions anymore. You're not chasing closure. You're not analyzing texts or checking his page. You're not arguing or defending yourself. You're too busy living. You're too busy healing. And the man who once had access to your emotions, good, bad, raw, vulnerable, now finds himself outside the gates, unable to reach the heart he once knew. This kind of peace cannot be faked, it's earned. It's built through tears you cried in silence, through boundaries you learned the hard way, through self-respect that came from choosing you over and over again. It's the quiet confidence of a woman who realized that being emotionally reactive kept her small. And now, she's untouchable, not because she's angry, but because she's free. And when a man sees that you are no longer emotionally moved by him, when he realizes that your silence is not a weapon, but a reflection of your peace, his ego takes the hit, a powerful one. Because now he knows, even if he comes back, he won't find the same woman waiting. One of the most effective and underestimated ways to crush a man's ego is not with revenge, not with arguments, and not with confrontation. It's with elevation. You rise quietly, powerfully, authentically. You show him through your actions, your glow up, your evolution, that he was never the pinnacle of your life. That's the real blow to a man who thought you'd be stuck, waiting, hurting, needing. Let me tell you something that many women miss after they've gone no contact. They forget that healing is not enough if you stay in the same place emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or physically. Growth has to become your new language. Elevation has to become your standard. Because the truth is, when you start to become the woman he didn't think you'd be without him, that's when it hits. Not when you text him paragraphs, not when you post vague quotes, but when he looks at your life and realizes you stop needing him to validate it. There's a kind of silence that speaks louder than any scream. It's the silence of becoming her, the woman who glows differently, who's focused on her goals, who's invested in herself, who's back in the gym, back on her path, back in alignment, who's laughing again, glowing from within, attracting peace and radiating purpose. That's not a show. That's transformation. And nothing humbles a man's ego more than watching a woman he thought would fall apart rise into a version of herself that doesn't include him anymore. You see, men expect you to grieve them loudly. They expect you to prove your pain. But when you grow in silence, when your life begins to look more peaceful, more fulfilled, more beautiful, they don't know how to process that. His ego gets bruised, not because you moved on, but because you moved up. You evolved. And not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Don't ever underestimate the power of emotional detachment and focused ambition, because when a man knows he's no longer a part of your story, when he sees your story is better without him, that's when his ego crumbles. When he sees that you're not chasing him, you're chasing dreams, purpose, fulfillment. He realizes he wasn't the center of your universe. And that realization hits him harder than any words you could have spoken. So elevate mentally, physically, emotionally. Build a life so full that his absence feels like peace. You don't need to get even. You don't need to clap back. Just evolve so high that he has to look up to see where you went. There's a truth many overlook when they think about crushing a man's ego after no contact. It's not about tearing him down. It's about mastering yourself in such a way that your presence, your peace, and your success become the ultimate silent victory. The most powerful way to crush a man's ego is by not giving him the power to affect your emotions anymore. When you take back control of your mind, your heart, your energy, you disarm him completely. Because what frustrates a man the most is realizing that no matter what he does or says, he no longer holds sway over your inner world. Imagine this. He expects you to be hurt, to be reacting, to be begging, or to be chasing. But instead, you rise above all that. You build your emotional fortress so strong that his words, his attempts to reach you, his manipulation simply bounce off. That is true power. That is what makes him question himself, makes his ego falter. When he can no longer provoke a reaction, he loses control, and that loss crushes his pride more than anything else could. You have to understand that ego feeds on control. It feeds on your attention, your vulnerability, your emotional responses. If you starve it of these, it weakens and withers. So, refusing to engage, refusing to be baited, and refusing to react is not weakness. It is strength disguised as calm. It's the power of self-mastery. It's the power of knowing your worth so deeply that no external force can shake your peace. This kind of mastery doesn't come overnight. It requires daily work, discipline over your thoughts, your feelings, and your impulses. It demands that you reclaim your narrative. You decide how you respond. You choose to rise above drama and chaos. This is the ultimate act of self-love and self-respect because it places you back in the driver's seat of your life. When a man sees this level of control, this unshakable calm, It sends a message louder than any words. You are no longer his to manipulate or diminish. And that realization, that's the final nail in the coffin for his ego. You've taken away what he valued most, your emotional power over him, and that strips him of his confidence and control. So, instead of wasting energy on trying to prove a point or get revenge, focus on mastering yourself. Elevate your mind, elevate your spirit, elevate your peace. Because when you do that, you become untouchable, unbreakable, and ultimately unstoppable. That is how you crush a man's ego. Not by chasing him, but by owning your life fully and fearlessly. Let this be your quiet revolution.